Good evening. My name is Paul Prentice. I'm president of the Pikes Peak Economics Club in Colorado Springs, and I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Tonight we're not having our regularly scheduled meeting, which occurs at the Vanguard School in Colorado Springs, and instead we're streaming a couple of recordings that we have made. The reason we're not having the meeting tonight is because it's the night of the Republican caucuses in our county, and a lot of people will be at those caucuses. If I could put in a plug, hopefully, for Ron Paul. The club was formed about 6 years ago now, and we formed in my living room with just a few of us who started really thinking that there was something seriously going wrong with the economy, and we started analyzing that. And one of my friends, Jeff Wright, pointed me to the Austrian School of Economics, and being an academically trained economist, of course I had never heard of the Austrian School when I was in graduate school. And I started reading a lot of their materials from Hayek and Mises and some of the greats of the Austrian School, and they started making a lot of sense to me. And furthermore, they started putting the current events, I could put them in the context of these larger forces at work with the destruction of the currency and the corruption of the banking system that the Austrian economists foresaw. And so we started this club where we just started talking about economic things, primarily from an Austrian perspective, and the club grew and grew, and eventually we started streaming on the internet. We have a meeting every month in a library of the public charter school, and thanks to Trace Melton of Rocky Mountain Streams, who handles our IT and helped us set up the website and does the audio visual for us, we're able to bring you an event tonight even though we're not there live. I'd like to spend a few minutes interviewing Trace Melton for you all, so that Trace can explain a little bit of the technology behind the club, behind the website, and what he's been doing for us. He's been working with the club for about 3 years now, helping us organize things with our website and doing the audio-visual through his Rocky Mountain Streams company. So Trace, if you can come up and maybe explain to some of the audience how to get on our email list and how to kind of access our materials. I should also let you know that another gentleman, Todd Hollenbeck from Students for Liberty, has been helping us by setting up a Facebook site and a Twitter account. So you can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter as well. But this is Trace Melton, so thanks for coming, Trace.
Thank you, Paul.
And maybe you could explain to the audience primarily how to get on the email list. I think a lot of people aren't quite sure how to do that.
You can get on the email list by emailing austrian-subscribe@pikespeakeconomicsclub.com, and the system will send you a confirmation email, and if you respond to that, then you'll be on the email list. There's also a link on the home page. If you click that and your browser and email are tied together, it'll pop open your email with everything filled out, and then all you have to do is click send. Again, you'll get the same confirmation message, and you'll have to reply to that in the positive.
Yeah. I think the confirmation reply is really critical. A lot of people, I've talked to them, they have gone and clicked on the link and they've sent everything out, but they failed to reply, so they never got on our list. So it's something people really need to make sure to follow up on.
Well, it's a safety feature so that I can't go subscribe somebody I'm not pleased with to 8,000 email lists without their consent. Because anybody can click that and fill out the form and send it. So they have to make sure that the machine's making sure that it's a valid email and that you truly did want to be part of the email list.
Okay, well, that's actually a good point, Trace. Maybe some of the audience is concerned about email privacy, and maybe you could explain some of our firewalls is not the right word, but our safety issues that we have for them.
Well, basically everything is hosted on a single server. It's all run for the Economics Club. There are a couple other sites on it, but it's not one of the big things. It has a pretty secure firewall. The email, the website, everything is hosted on the same machine. It's not farmed out to like Constant Contact or any of the other ones. Those sites tend to track. When they send you an email and you click on something in it, they know who clicked on it, where you went, all that stuff. We do none of that tracking right now. So we're looking maybe at the possibility of something like that in the future, but we're also going to ask the club and where they want to go before we just implement something like that.
Right. We certainly respect your privacy and your right to remain anonymous. Another thing that the viewers might find interesting is how to find the videos from archived events or from past events or ongoing events. I know at one point you were posting to a system called Ustream, and now you've got your own company called Rocky Mountain Streams, and even I, Trace, I'm a little confused as to which link is the right one to go and find some of our events.
Well, on RockyMountainStreams.com, there's a tab at the top called Portfolio, and I do list all my events in there. I even did one for Occupy last week too. My caller from the Constitution spoke there. The Constitution Made Easy. Anyway, all the events are there. They are still on the Ustream because that is where they get recorded too, and they are still archived there. They're being archived under my channel now, the Rocky Mountain Streams channel. I guess we could get together and build an archive page once we get the other 30 things on our list.
Well, I think for now we do have links on the homepage of the Economics Club itself, pikespeakeconomicsclub.com, links to the Rocky Mountain Stream site, which then would have what we need. And every time we have an event that we record, we then put a link to that on the event in the website itself. When you click on the event link in the website, it'll click you to an archive of that posting event. And you've noticed, perhaps if you've been with us for a few years, you've noticed the continued improved quality of our productions and Trace behind a lot of that. Which brings up my next point, which is we all have mortgages and rent to pay. And Trace Melton surely would appreciate some donations for his work through the Economics Club. And if you want to do that, there's information on the front page of the Economics Club about how to send a check to PPEC, Pikes Peak Economics Club. And if at the very bottom or on the notation section of the check you put the word streaming, that'll make sure that check is dedicated to Trace Melton with Rocky Mountain Streams. I think it's a very valuable service. If you can attend our meetings, more the better. We'd like to have a good audience at the meetings, but several of you are around the country, and I believe several of you are out of the country. So we would appreciate some support for the technology.
Thank you. And I'd also at this time like to thank Mary, Dr. Mary Z, for AllianceForHealthReform.com. She's working on trying to fix Obamacare and the defaults in that. Well, actually repeal it and come up with a sane policy. But a lot of the equipment that we're using is hers, so we do owe her a thanks for that too. And we started out with a webcam that we taped to a tripod 3 years ago and a little netbook, and we started transmitting like that, and now we have a professional camera, studio lights, mixers, audio mixers, and we I think are doing a much better job of streaming the shows now.
I agree. The production quality is up, and the content hopefully remains as high as ever. The one thing I want to maybe you could help the audience with is working their way through sort of navigating the website, the various buttons and links on the top, where they can go and how they go and click on various things that are on the main screen up on top. Maybe
on the Economics Club?
Yeah, for the PPEC, maybe you could help them with that.
Well, if you look at the homepage, not going to the links at the top because I haven't memorized them right now, the homepage kind of has a brief history. Right below that has the most recent entries that Dr. Prentice has put on the site. So you can look there because they're in reverse chronological order for the most recent stuff. The other most important thing is going to be the calendar on the right side, that it's got the events. Anytime there's an event coming up, you can click on the day and get there. Of course, there's the home button or the logo that always gets you back to the home. There's an events tab and a news tab.
Yeah.
So if the events are the events that Paul's either promoting or hosting himself, and the news tabs are articles that Dr. Prentice thinks is relevant to economics and that people at the club would be interested in, and he posts links to those.
There's also a link for our library. We have almost 300 donated books, videos, CDs of economic content, mostly political economy and mostly from the Austrian perspective. But they're available for members to come and just take out. Of course, you can't do that on the internet, but if you come to a meeting, you can check out one of our books or DVDs or CDs. Trace mentioned the calendar on the right. I actually use that almost more than any of the other features of the website, because when I post those various events, frequently there will be articles associated with those events. So when you go to the event, the links are right there to those articles. And if it's a past event, click on the past event, and Shazam, I've always put up a link to the archived video of that event, so you can catch up with us there. So we sure hope you do appreciate the website, appreciate the technology, and once again, checks are appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tonight we're going to show two different discussions. They both come from one event. Back in the fall of 2010, John Michael Chambers and the Save America Foundation had an event in Denver called the Economic Summit. And it was designed around these ideas that there is a serious rot in the economy and the people need to start preparing for the ultimate collapse of that entire system and seeing about what we can do to help rebuild the future economy out of those ashes. And in that event, there were two talks that were taped, again by Trace Melton of Rocky Mountain Streams. One of them was my talk on the moral basis of capitalism. And then the other one I wanted to show you tonight is by Ann Barnwell. And she talks about state banking. She's been speaking at various venues around the country on the idea of bringing banking out of control, the central control of the federal government through the Federal Reserve System and bringing it back to the state level. In my opinion, hopefully that's an intermediate step towards ultimately the goal of the Austrian economists is total free market banking entirely, with a free market-based currency behind that. There's about three sort of main what are called schools of economic thought in the modern world, and these are named after either people or places, but they're not that. What they are is ideas. One of them is the most popular right now. I would guess that probably 80%, 85% of all economics professors in America would believe in what's called Keynesian economics. And Keynes believed that markets didn't work. He believed that prices failed to clear markets, that prices were too sticky to allow markets to clear effectively and in time, and required government intervention, because when prices and wages were sticky, you could have sustained periods of unemployment, what he called in the long run, we're all dead. We can't just wait for the long run for these prices to clear the markets. And so he set up a theoretical basis justifying massive government intrusion in the economy, originally just with spending and then with taxing, and finally it's come to be the neo-Keynesian idea of almost centralized control. It's become a very Marxist redistributionist type of economic theory. But Keynes in the original idea was that markets don't really work, they don't really clear, and that left to their own you can have sustained periods of unemployment that are harmful to people, and it required government intervention in the form of primarily government spending and government debt to get us out of that. And that's the Keynesian school. It's very anti-markets and anti-free markets. Now, opposed to that, there's two schools of free market economics, and they themselves have differences. But the two schools of free market economics are the Chicago School, named after the University of Chicago, and whose primary exponent of that was Milton Friedman, who interestingly believed in free markets for everything except free banking. One of the problems that the Austrians, and I'll go to that in a minute, but one of the problems the Austrians see with the Chicago School is the idea that you can't have centralized command and control over this one most important price in the entire economy, and that's the price of capital. This control of the interest rate, and when you understand what interest is, interest coordinates production and consumption through time. Basically, Milton Friedman and the Chicago School miraculously cede centralized power of that price, the price of time itself, to a government authority. Now, it's my belief that Milton Friedman and many of the Chicago followers of him, school followers, were transitioning to the full free markets of the Austrian school. But it's a transition. It's a transition I found myself very difficult to make as a classically trained Keynesian, if you will, in graduate school, all the way through then the supply side in the Chicago school, but to come to what I consider to be real economics of the Austrian school. So the Austrian school says, well, we have to differentiate what's called the real economy, production and consumption, people working and trading and pursuing their own values, and separate that from the idea of the money that greases that economy to make it work. So we have the real economy of production and the monetary economy over here off to the side. And in the real economy, people have to save for the future in order for other people to invest in the future. And the price that clears this market for savings and investment is the interest rate, and that interest rate then coordinates production and consumption through time. And when that interest rate is artificially imposed by the federal government, in particular, when the federal government, they always like to lower the interest rate, what it does is distort all the time decisions in the economy and creates a series of bubbles, a series of booms and busts, booms and busts, booms and busts, and leaves the economy with what von Mises called massive structural malinvestment. In other words, if you've kept interest rates too low for too long, below their natural market clearing rate, and the natural market clearing rate, remember, is the rate that would occur when people really save out of their current income so other people can really invest in future projects, instead of just having this printed currency, pretend that that's real capital. So this real capital, real savings, when the government lowers that interest rate, it tends to make more of the future-oriented projects look better than they actually are. So you engage in more production of housing and things like that have very long time frames. And as a result, after 20, 30, 40, now 50, 60, 70 years of this, what we have is basically too many houses and not enough factories. And you can't just change a house into a factory, and I suppose you can change a factory into a house, but it's a very slow, difficult process. And the Austrians recognized this tremendous distortion and misallocation of resources through the capital markets, driven by the government's interference with that prime price, the most important price of all. It's not the price of toothpaste or the price of oil, or even the price of labor. It's the price of time, the interest rate. And we cannot cede that to a central authority, no matter how we may believe they are benign. And typically they are not benign. Now, with respect to the Keynesian school, it's my belief that John Maynard Keynes himself will be rolling over in his grave based on what's been happening in his name. Keep in mind that all he was saying was that prices and wages are fairly sticky and we need some government spending to kind of get an economy going when those prices and wages are not allowed to clear or when they don't clear the markets adequately. But what he also said was that the government should run a deficit during the recessionary cycle of the business phase of the business cycle, but it should collect and run a surplus during the expansion phase, so that over the course of that business cycle, over the total course of the cycle, there should be no net accumulation of government debt. In other words, run the deficit during a recession, pay it off during the boom, and you've got a more stable, as it was called, economic stability program to help the economy in the case of the sticky wages and prices not adjusting. Now, he didn't really give full credit to the or if you will, blame to the Hoover-Roosevelt regimes of creating sticky wages and prices to begin with through their institutional interference in the markets. But what is being done now in his name with these massive government spendings, with continuous chronic deficits as far as the eye can see of massive proportions, 40% of every dollar spent by the federal government is now borrowed. That's nothing to do with the original idea of John Maynard Keynes. It was for limited government interference in the market and limited government spending, and only during the recessionary cycle, and to be paid off during the boom cycle. And of course the politicians love to spend the money during the recession, but they're very loath to collect the revenue during the recovery, so they don't pay off the debt. And now we've just got a real problem with the massive debt we have accumulated. I want to read you a quote from John Maynard Keynes in case you think he was really totally hostile to a capitalist system, and he really wasn't. It says, I'll read it. It says, quote, "By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no subtler, surer way of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. This process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose." Now that's an interesting quote from John Maynard Keynes, in whose name all this printing of money and all this spending of money and all this accumulation of debt is occurring. But it was nothing near to what he originally espoused. Well, we have two videos for you tonight, pre-recorded. They were recorded at what was called the Economic Summit that was held in Denver, Colorado last fall. It was hosted by John Michael Chambers and the Save America Foundation. And in that day-long event, consisting of a lot of people that were just really concerned about the direction of the country and the economy, there were two talks that were given, one by myself on the moral basis of capitalism, and the second one by Marilyn Barnwell on state banking. And Marilyn is a nationally known speaker. She's spoken around the country at various venues on the idea of having a state-controlled banking system rather than the Federal Reserve. And in my opinion, that's a really great transition or segue to a full free market, free currency banking system eventually. But better to have this at the state level than at the federal government level. So we'll hear from Marilyn Barnwell later. So I hope you enjoy these two videos tonight. They should be most interesting, and we hope to see you for a live meeting next month in March. In March, we're going to be presenting a paper that we'll talk about at the Austrian Scholars Conference at Auburn, Alabama. It's called "Does Government Crowd Out Private Responsibility?" So it's a philosophic, an economic, and eventually also a biblical perspective on human behavior and moral behavior in the context of government regulations. So I hope you enjoy that one in March. For July, we're not quite sure. We're going to have a meeting again, so we'll probably stream something in July and perhaps also in September. I'm not sure. But just stay tuned by going to our website, pikespeakeconomicsclub.com, and there you can click on a link on the very front page that will take your email address and put you on our email list so you can be informed of all of our events as they come up. And of course, you can always visit the website anytime to see the most recent links to events and news stories and other articles that we have posted there. So I'm surely hoping you make use of our website and enjoy us a lot. Now, the moral basis of capitalism talk that you're about to see is something I developed about 10 years ago with the Independence Institute in Golden, Colorado. We started an entire course called Free People, Free Markets. And out of that course came eventually a three-part video series. This is part one of that series, Free People, Free Markets. Part one, the moral basis of capitalism. The concern, of course, is that society seems to have gotten so confused that about half of your fellow citizens out there in America believe that they could vote for a controlled economy and somehow maintain a free society. And of course, you cannot have a controlled economy in a free society because the economy is the society. It is us. The economy is us, and that's what people do. So that's very dangerous misinformation out there, and the club is dedicated to changing people's minds about that, if I can put it politely. So the moral basis of capitalism starts out, and the idea is that voluntary trade makes the economy work as long as people are behaving morally. And where does that moral basis come from? It could come from one of two places. Come from the Judeo-Christian biblical background of love thy neighbor as thyself, or do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. In other words, no lying, cheating, and stealing, right? Just engaging in moral, voluntary trade. And if you don't have a biblical perspective, that's perfectly fine. You could have the sort of humanist perspective, or if you will, the Ayn Rand perspective, that really it comes from our humanity. So I think Judge Napolitano frequently says it doesn't matter if you believe that your rights come from theology or if they come from biology. The fact is you have these rights and you need to exercise them.
Moving forward, next on our speaking stage, we will enjoy hearing from Dr. Paul Prentice. Dr. Prentice has served as the chief macroeconomist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture under Presidents Carter and Reagan. He has also been visiting scholar at the U.S. Department of Treasury under President Clinton. Paul earned both his MA in mathematics and his PhD in agricultural economics from the University of Connecticut. He currently serves, and this is where I've experienced some of his wonderful work, as senior fellow at the Independence Institute, as adjunct scholar at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, founding faculty and professor of economy at Yorktown University, adjunct faculty at the University of Colorado Springs campus, and board member of Limited Government Forum. He's also a fellow at Centennial Institute and board member of the Urban League of Pikes Peak Region and president of the Pikes Peak Economics Club. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Paul Prentice.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Kirk, for your words there, words of wisdom about the economy, and thanks to John Michael Chambers and JMC Productions for sponsoring this. Thanks to all of you for coming up this morning to listen to all of this. I know it's not easy to listen to bad news after bad news, but as Dr. Elliott finished up, we're going to end up with a little bit of hope here. And certainly thank you to all of you watching around the world on the internet today. What I'm going to speak about is a topic that I've been developing for several years called the moral basis of capitalism. Because if you really want to understand what's happening in the economy, you have to understand what's happening to our society, what's happening to our people, what's happening to our moral basis and principles. There's another lecture I have that would have easily fit into this, but I'm not going to do it today. It's called The Link Between the Degenerating Currency and the Degenerating Culture. Because what we have is ultimately we have a corruption of the banking system, a corruption of the currency that is behind the corruption of your fellow citizens. But in order to even go there, we have to understand where it came from, this whole idea of the moral basis of capitalism. I need a little help here with technology on bringing up my PowerPoint. I'm not sure which one it is, John. And while we're getting that ready, just to give you a little bit of the background, to explain myself, what was I doing working for Jimmy Carter and then working for Reagan, and then working again for Clinton? You may wonder. Well, here's the situation. I was trained at the University of Connecticut, graduate school in economics, and in that school, they trained me to believe that if you took money from productive people and gave it to unproductive people, it would create income and wealth. It's called the Keynesian multiplier. They trained me that if you printed these pieces of paper called currency, it would actually improve the economy. So I believed that. And then I came to work for Jimmy Carter believing that, because my parents were unreconstructed Roosevelt Democrats, and I grew up in that family. That's what I believed. I believed that government was good, business was bad, and by gosh, I was going to go down to Washington and help people. Well, it took me less than 6 months under Jimmy Carter to realize there was something really wrong with how I'd been trained. There's something wrong with the basic paradigm, because everything we've been told was supposed to fix the economy, government spending and printing of money was making things worse and worse and worse. Now, they made the fatal flaw of training me also as a scientist. So they didn't realize, because as a scientist, when you see data, and the data is orthogonal to the theory that you've learned, and the data is real, you've got to question your theory. So that led me to start investigating what was happening in the political realm with speeches coming out from people like Art Laffer, the supply-side economists. Started listening to President Reagan's campaign speeches, and I started thinking, this is making a lot more sense than what I learned in graduate school. And with that, I began a long and difficult transition from being a Keynesian economist through the Chicago School, more of a market-oriented economic perspective, but still not complete, because the Chicago School, for all of its market-oriented glory, still believes in central command and control of our money and interest, the price of capital. So that eventually led me to the Mises Institute and the Austrian School of Economics. And it's called Austrian not because it's in Austria, it's just an Austrian school, a school of thought based on hardcore free market principles, including free market money. So I transitioned, and people noticed that I was transitioning in my thinking because I was doing congressional testimony and other things, and I was invited to stay on under President Reagan. And even as much of a pleasure as that was, I realized government service was not for me. So I started a consulting business, and several years later under Bill Clinton, I was invited back to the Treasury Department. If you remember, when was the last time we had a balanced budget? Was that under the Republicans? No, it was actually Bill Clinton, and he had the courage to sign those bills, to sign that. Now, of course, the pressure was from the Gingrich Congress, but the Treasury Department is part of the executive branch, and the executive branch was under President Clinton. It was a Democrat. It was a Democrat that did that. Okay? And you remember, maybe you remember, the 1990s weren't so bad as an economy. Okay? We had problems. There was too much regulation. They tried to raise too many taxes, but mostly the currency was fairly sound. The economy was growing strongly. People were doing well. Under President Bush, a Republican, he started the spending that Obama just ramped up to the nth power. So a lot of this problem has nothing to do with political party, and that's why I wanted that that introduction to reflect my bipartisan background, although I am a hardcore Republican now. I'm wondering if the party hasn't left me. The idea here is that these are founding principles of America, not founding principles of Republicans and Democrats. This is about we the people. This is our heritage. So I'm going to speak to that heritage. The idea that a free market economy is part of our lifeblood of America, part of our grant of liberty from nature's God, is our economy. So I'm going to start with that now. We have this particular phrase I put up at the front of this. It says, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Okay, amen to that. But did you know that was actually the Great Seal of the United States? It was the first official motto of the United States of America, penned by Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and John Adams. Well, wouldn't today's Supreme Court call that unconstitutional? So you wonder what has happened to these principles. What's happened to our moral understanding of the nature of reality and who we are as people and as a nation? Okay, so with that, I'll begin. This is part of a three-part course called Free People, Free Markets. I'll thank the Independence Institute and Golden for helping me put that together. There's some basic references here for you. Of course, there's thousands of hours of reading behind it, but one is by Michael Novak. He's a Catholic scholar. It's called On Two Wings, Humble Faith and Common Sense at America's Founding. Faith and Reason. Faith and Reason. Two wings of the eagle make him fly. The second one by Cleon Skousen called The 5,000-Year Leap. I'm going to draw that 5,000 years for you in about 5 minutes. F.A. Hayek, an Austrian scholar, wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, a must read. A book by an atheist, Ayn Rand, a collection of readings called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Because I don't care if you believe your liberty comes from theology or from biology. Liberty is liberty. So let's stop this fighting among the libertarians about who is where and what and just get to the core concepts. It's liberty. It's up to you as to where you believe it comes from. I believe it comes from our Creator. It's fine with me if you don't believe that. That happens to be your issue. Okay. So here's a spiritual perspective on moral economics. J.W. Richards, 2 years ago, wrote a great book called Money, Greed, and God, Why Capitalism is the Solution and Not the Problem. And a very small book, about 120 pages, but a great read by Charles Gove, Jesus, the Unknown Economist. Because you see, we are created, we are human beings. Would you not think the great spiritual books and the great spiritual leaders, in fact our God himself to many of us, would know about how an economy works? Read the Bible, get that biblical content on economics. It's powerful, powerful statements. Okay, and we heard already that the Bible warns us about debt, being a debt slave. There's lots of wisdom there. Okay, so I'll start off with this. And I don't pretend to be a biblical scholar at all. I want to thank several mentors I've had over the way. One at the Emmaus Anglican Church down here in Castle Rock, one at the Fellowship Bible Church in Colorado Springs for helping me work through some of the theology here. But let me give you this. 2 Thessalonians. We gave you this command. If anyone will not work, let him not eat. For we hear that some of you are living in idleness, mere busybodies, not doing any work. Now we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work in quietness and earn their own living. Well, that was written a long time ago, 2,000 years ago, but doesn't it apply to some of your neighbors? Okay. All right. But here's what's interesting to me as an economist. Behind this statement is an implicit assumption that the natural state of an economy, the natural state of man, is a strong economy in which you can go out and earn your own living. That the average person has some gift that they can specialize in and produce and then trade that with the fruits of someone else's labor. That's the natural state of an economy. If an economy is not working, it's in an unnatural state because we've broken some basic principles of humanity. Okay. Well, so we call this capitalism. Capitalism. What is it? I get a lot of concern and confusion, particularly among my students about this. I asked one student, a young lady from Oregon, what was capitalism in a graduate class once, and she said, well, capitalism, that's a system whereby the strong exploit the rich. Okay? Well, it didn't take me long to abuse her of that notion, but here it is. Capitalism is the economic dimension of liberty. We have to define our terms if we're going to make good arguments. We have to define this. There's so much confusion about what things mean. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time defining terms. Well, you say capitalism is the economic dimension of liberty. That doesn't say anything until you know what economics means. Well, economics is the use of scarce resources that have alternative uses to achieve goals. If resources weren't scarce, you wouldn't have to economize. Everybody could have everything they wanted all the time. You wouldn't face choices and trade-offs and opportunity costs. Scarcity drives this choice system. So that's what the study of economics is. Well, what is liberty? Ask a lot of people about liberty, and my students will frequently say, well, sure, that's freedom. But it's not freedom. Freedom is license. I'm not free to come and bonk you over the head, take your wallet. I'm not free to come and steal your property or harm you in any way. I'm at liberty. Liberty is responsibility tempered by, liberty is freedom tempered by responsibility to a moral code. So this moral basis of capitalism, what's going wrong with our economy, is fundamentally a moral problem. A moral problem being reflected in the economy. Well, capitalism must be a philosophy, huh? Well, a philosophy has to have three distinct components, otherwise it's just a set of interesting ideas. So to be a philosophy, and by the way, that means love of truth or love of knowledge, you have to have a set of ethics, a clearly defined statement of what is right and what is wrong. You have to have a statement of metaphysics, something about the nature of reality itself. And you have to have what we call an epistemology, which is simply a fancy word for saying some method for discovering what is true and what is real. When you have all those three together, you've got a concrete philosophy. Well, capitalism is a philosophy. It's not just an economic system. That's a result of a philosophy. Okay, it's an idea system. Ah, darn it. Here's back to Obamacare. We just can't escape it, can we? So that's going to be a hard pill to swallow, my plan. Psst, it's a suppository. So, capitalist ethics. What do I mean by that? Okay, let's take a look at how Adam Smith defined this. Back in 1776, do you think that was an accident? He wrote The Wealth of Nations, was published in 1776. I think that year was somewhat coincidental with America's founding. Do you think that book traveled around the world at the speed of ship? Yes, it did. Do you think our founders read that book? Yes, they did. We have evidence that Thomas Jefferson met with Adam Smith. We have evidence that Ben Franklin met with Adam Smith on their various trips to try to prevent the revolution from happening, to try to solve the problems we had with England back in London. So at any rate, here's what he says. Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, some moral code, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest his own way. Well, here's what John Stuart Mill had to say, paraphrasing the same idea. The only freedom deserving the name is that of pursuing our own good and our own way, so long as we don't attempt to deprive others of theirs. You see, I'm at liberty when I set you at liberty. I can't be at liberty if you're not, and you can't be at liberty if I'm not. I'm not free to take from you, and you're not free to take from me. Well, this really comes from two threads. I'll draw the threads out later, but let's start with the Greco-Roman legacy. Way too long a quote, so I'll just do the highlights. Cato the Younger, 75 BC. By liberty, I understand the power which every man has over his own actions, and his right to enjoy the fruits of his labor. I'm going to say that again because I'll come back to it over and over again. The right to enjoy the fruits of your labor, as far as by it he hurts not the society. Well, that's the same statement, isn't it? Only he wrote that 1700 years before Adam Smith wrote it. So all these people started reading these things. You look at the founders, you look at the great institutions of Western Europe back when they were great institutions, because they were grounded in these great ideas. These ideas of Western civilization that took thousands of years to bubble up through society. So one of the threads of our liberty goes back to the Greco-Roman legacy. The other thread is what I call the capitalist golden rule. It's grounded in Judeo-Christian ethics. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. These are not just Christian ideas. That goes back into the Old Testament of the Bible as well. It's found in Leviticus. And in fact, It's called the law of liberty in the book of James. The law of liberty. To treat others as you would like to be treated. That's what liberty is. So we have this Judeo-Christian thread and this Greco-Roman thread coming together. Let's contrast this with the socialist ethics, which is said exactly as Karl Marx said it, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. In other words, if you have a wallet and I need it, I have the moral authority to go and take it from you. What a different morality, a different perspective. Okay? Let me go back one. This golden rule, this is called the ethics of reciprocity. You could look it up. It's found in 21 of the 23 major world philosophies, religions, and belief systems. 21 of 23. You might ask, well, what are the other two? Marxism and Satanism. But that's redundant, isn't it? Okay. It's so deeply ingrained in humanity, you may think it is actually a law of human nature, a natural law, just as a mathematics law or a law of physics is. And it is, in fact. We're hardwired that way. Well, back to Karl Marx, from each according to his ability. Well, here's what Adolf Hitler, another Marxist, had to say. Do not be confused when people tell you that Adolf Hitler was a right-winger. Okay, what do you think, the German National Socialist Party wasn't left-wing? Are you kidding me? Who stole our language? Who stole this language? Let's be clear. Society's needs come before the individual's needs. The left is about the collective. The right is about the individual. That's how we define this. When we clarify those terms, we can see the confusion. All right, what about metaphysics? Well, to a capitalist, and you're looking at one, reality is objective. Objective. It's not subjective. There exists absolute truth. And among these truths is that man's nature is fixed. It's rooted in enlightened self-interest. That's our basic nature. If you doubt this, just read the Old Testament. And you'll read stories of love and hate, bravery, cowardice, greed, charity. Go back and read Thucydides or the ancient Greeks or Romans. You'll find the same stories. Read Shakespeare. You'll read the same stories. Look around yourselves at your families and your neighbors. You're seeing the same stories. It's the human nature. Okay? Somewhere above the animals and below the angels, and if you don't like that, take it up with the manufacturer. That's just what we are. Okay? We have this dual nature here. And it's fixed for all time. You could take today's headlines. You could have read them back in 2000 BC if they had headlines then. You could take headlines from Cicero. Read them today. Same thing. The historian Tyler that was referenced earlier has referenced that the stages of democracy and the danger to a republic or a democratic republic is the people would vote themselves large S from the government. That goes back to one of the Caesars. I don't know if it's Tiberius or maybe it was Claudius. I don't have the exact reference. But he said, our republic is doomed because the people have learned they can vote themselves bread and circuses. So what is new in the world here? What is new? Another thing about objective reality is the following. I stand up here before you on a podium. This is a podium. Okay, that is a word that means a particular thing. And if I was to sit on it, it doesn't make it a chair. And if I'm to lie on it, it doesn't make it a bed. It is objectively what it is. Aristotle said what something is matters. That definition is critical to understanding reality. Okay? This is a podium, and that's what it is. It doesn't matter what I do with it. If I pick it up and bonk you over the head with it, it doesn't change the fact it's a podium. Okay? Well, it's important to understand words. Socialist metaphysics. What do they think about reality? What reality? Reality is subjective. This podium, hey, it's whatever I say it is. Let's look at Stalin's first census. After he was in power for a while, he wanted to find out how well the people were doing. So he hired a bunch of census takers, sent them out into the countryside, and they came back with the bad news. The people were miserable, starving to death, and there was fewer of them than there were before. So what did Stalin do? He didn't like that data. That data was objective reality. Okay? He had the census takers shot. Then their families rounded up and had them shot. Then he hired some more census takers. They went out and they came back with, you betcha boss, good news out there in Soviet land. Okay, that was reality. Nothing objective about it at all. Hugo Chavez says this. He doesn't like the data that shows the GDP in Venezuela is just stinks. So he says it's a capitalist plot. Sarkozy says this. We don't like the idea that the economic data shows that the French standard of living is 1/3 below America's. After all, we are French. So GDP is a capitalist plot. Let's have something more equal. Let's weigh things, and we'll have equality indicators. Okay, so there's no objective reality about measuring an economy. So how do we feel about things? And most importantly, man's nature is malleable. It's not fixed the way we believe. It can be perfected through the state. That they can create new Soviet man, somehow free of this hardwired enlightened self-interest that we have. Well, they've tried that. And in the trying, they've killed between 120 and 150 million people. I'm not talking about soldiers dead on the battlefield. I'm talking about innocent men, women, and children that just wanted to live their lives in peace. And they still didn't eradicate enlightened self-interest from the human being. But when you hear this phrase, I'm going to fundamentally transform America, this is harking back to this. This is rooted in that idea that you can create a new Soviet man. They just don't use those words. Okay. Let's skip the census. I'm trying to make up some time here. What about this thing called the epistemology? Okay. How do we know? How do we know all this? Well, let's talk about the rational mind. Let's use logic and data and science. That's what gave us this wonderful standard of living here, this harnessing of electric power all around us to cool us in the summer and heat us in the winter, run our machines and give us food, food unknown to the world before, food in so much abundance that the poorest among us are dying from obesity-related diseases. Okay. But that wasn't because somebody thought that Jove was up in a cloud somewhere throwing lightning bolts down on the earth. Because somebody did some scientific experiments, collected data. Now, that might have been divinely inspired to go and search for that. I do not deny that. Okay? But it wasn't the divine inspiration that gave us the science that showed how we could harness electrons. Okay? So we're very much scientific. Socialist epistemology. Well, this reality is perceived not through logic, but through emotion. It's determined by feelings. Ask any leftist what they think about something, and they'll always come back and say, well, I feel that. It's unbelievable. I have graduate students, MBA students, business people, graduate students. And I ask them, what do you think about the unemployment rate? And they go, well, Dr. Prentice, I feel that it's too high. I just want to come back in the audience and smack them on the head and say, you dope. I did not ask you what you felt about the unemployment rate. I asked you what you thought about it. My God, man, don't you know the difference? And they don't. They don't know the difference. Okay, so we have to go back to this idea of reason and faith. Okay. America's founders intended a free market economy. There is no doubt about this. Do not let anybody deceive you. Here's a simple statement by Thomas Jefferson. I think all the world would gain by setting commerce at perfect liberty. Jefferson didn't say, I think all the world will gain by having a U.S. Department of Commerce. Okay. James Madison, I own myself the friend to a very free system of commerce and hold as a truth that commercial shackles are generally unjust, oppressive.